All right, what's going on, Ontraland? I have something very exciting to show you today, and that is our version of a deadline funnel that you can get for absolutely $0 That's it, absolutely free by using ClickFix shortcodes and a little bit of extra help from two additional free apps that I'm going to show you as we walk through this. But let me first show you exactly what this looks like. All right, so you can imagine here we're on a landing page. You can see the timers there counting down from 24 hours, 1 day. We have somebody go ahead and put in their email. Let's go ahead and put in our ClickFix email. Let's try download Deadline Funnel 3. And let's go ahead and put this in here. And it takes us to page 2. Keep your eye on the timer there. 23 hours, 58 minutes, and some odd seconds. All right, and there we go. 23 hours, 58 minutes, and 30 seconds. You can see that these two timers line up. And what we've done, you can see here that the email would actually be hidden on this page, as with this button, because we put this in a separate block or in a separate section here, just in case you want to be able to pass this information to a third page. So you have to think about this in terms of a landing page and then this thank you page. Let's say that maybe it's a on-demand video, maybe it's a sales page, maybe it's some other sort of offer. And if you wanted to be able to then have somebody click and go on to the next page, like the checkout page or whatever, then we go ahead and pass their information. So that way on the next page, this also would line up and you'd be able to have a timer on that third page that goes ahead and keeps counting down to create that sense of urgency and that FOMO rolling. Now I'm going to go ahead and start walking through the way that we set this up in a second. But I'm also going to pause the video for a second because I want you to be able to also see the email that we have attached to this, because that's where the real magic happens. All right, so the email came through pretty quick this time. And so you can see here that we actually even have a countdown timer in the email that is counting down. And okay, you'll have to forgive us. There is a slight delay here. So you can see that there's a few seconds difference between the timer on your page versus the timer in the email. But of course, in a normal situation, the person would only be looking at the email or only be looking at the website, most likely. So that kind of 3-second variance won't make too much of a difference. So hopefully you're excited because you can see here that we were able to go ahead and install or be able to say that the deadline here is going to end tomorrow, because today is April 1st. It's going to end tomorrow at 4:38, which is about 4 minutes after I started this video in this little session here. So you can see here that it's just a very simple email, and we're using And you can see here that's a very simple email, and all we're doing is we're using two different merge fields to go ahead and create all of this magic. So without further ado, let's jump into exactly how we set this up, so that way you can install and do the same thing on your website. All right, so first we have page 1. Okay, page 1, it's super simple. You can see that it's actually 2 blocks, and I'll show you why that second block is there in a second, or at the end of the video. What we have to do first is we have to go ahead and have a timer. We've chosen to put a timer inline. You could also put this into its own block and have it be a sticky header with the built-in controls, or you could use some of our shortcodes to make it a sticky footer. Wherever you think the timer should be, that's where you go ahead and put it. One thing to keep in mind here is that we want to go ahead and put a date way in the future, because if I were to go ahead and put April 2nd, for example, on this countdown date, what it would do is it would tell us it would work today while I'm showing you the video, but tomorrow, after that date and time passes, the timer would no longer work, even though we're trying to override it with our ClickFix shortcode. So the best practice is to go ahead and just put this timer way, way, way out in the future, because we're going to be using shortcodes to actually control it. So you can see that I went ahead and put the year 2470, and I believe that your business will have probably either really blown up by then, or you won't be around to care so much. So, 2470 sounded like a good year to me. All right, so after that, after you have your timer in place, the thing that we're going to need, or 2 fields that we'll need, is we're going to need an email field, right? That's just normal because we're going to tie this to the person's contact record. And then we have a custom field called deadline end. And this deadline end is a date and time field, right? And I'll show you that in the back end. But at the end of the video, I'll also tell you exactly how you can just go ahead and import our pre-built campaign, which will go ahead and make these custom fields for you and have all of the webhook ready to go for you to just swap out your information. But you make a custom field like you would any other time, and it is a date and time field. I've chosen to give it the name of deadline end. And those are the only two fields you need on this page, regular submit button and whatever other design features you want. Then the under the hood magic is done here. Inside the custom code editor, we have our ClickFix JavaScript here that enables the shortcodes. And then we just have this div, so that way we have it display none, so it doesn't pop up when the page first loads. And we go ahead and use our timer shortcode. And we say that we want it to be a 24-hour countdown clock. We could have this be 15 minutes. We could have it be 25 seconds, whatever you want. There are also other variables and other possibilities you could put on this timer. If you refer to our documentation over here at doc.clickfix.io, you can go ahead and just type in timer, and you can see all of the fancy ways that you can set this timer up to be able to have it on a rolling schedule, like every quarter hour, all kinds of different interesting things that you can do with this. But back to this page, we've said that we want it to be a 24-hour countdown, and we've identified the field that we want to pass the end date to. And this field is F2466. And I'll show you how to get that information in a second. And we say display equals no because we want it to hide the days counter if possible. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at this page. And if we go back to deadline 1 here, right, we can see that this field is automatically hidden by our shortcode. So if we want to find out what that field is, we have an option to do it this way by going ahead and going into our code. Normally you would obviously figure out what this field is before you mess with anything. And we'll go ahead and just publish this. All right, go back to deadline 1. All right, so now we have deadline end, and for me to find out what that field ID is, I use the ClickFix Chrome extension that you can download once you become a free member of ClickFix. This just helps us identify a whole bunch of different things. In this case, we need the field ID. So this field ID is F2466, right? And that is exactly what we have here in our custom code. Let's go ahead and enable this again. And so we're just telling it that we want to pass the actual, in this case, 24 hours from the exact moment that somebody submits the form. We want it to pass that value as a timestamp into field 2466, and then that will also be tied to their contact record. Okay, so we have this page set up for now. We will be coming back to this later to do some additional things, but we're going to go ahead and just publish it so it's working. And then we're going to back out and we're going to go over to page 2. And actually, before I jump over to page 2, let's just take a look at the last thing that's important to remember for page 1. And that is on the submit button. We have some form settings that we need to go ahead and throw in there. All right, you can see that none of this stuff is checked or anything like that, but we do need to add on ? Email with a capital E, because this is the built-in Ontraport way of doing it, equals email, which is our merge field, and timer equals, and we need to have it be deadline end, percentage sign, U, capital U, percentage sign, plus 0 days, 0 hours, 0 minutes. And all that really means is that we need this in a specific format for us to be able to use it later with the timer. Okay, this is actually something that is important because this is what's putting it into Unix time, and then this is what our shortcode will read on page 2. All right? So it's very important that we do this. Now, if you don't want to have to type this deadline end or whatever the name of your field is, it's very simple. The way you do this is you would just go ahead and drop on a text element here. We would just get rid of this, and we would go and we do a merge field, and mine is called deadline end, you'll remember, and it gives us the formatter. And I say I want it in, I want it in Unix, and I don't want any offset. The times end doesn't matter because it's Unix. You say insert field, and this is exactly what we would cut and paste into this parameter of timer equals, and we just paste it right in there, and we have exactly what we need. All right, so now we'll jump over to page 2. And we'll put page 1 over here, and we'll come back to that later. And you can see that we were doing kind of the same thing here. We were just messing around with different possibilities here. But all you really need to do on page 2, this part again, this is only important to have the email here, and you can also have this as a hidden field. The only thing that this is important for is if you do want it to automatically redirect to a third page that also is tied into that person's email, and therefore also tied into the timer. If you go ahead and add that timer value that we saw from page 1, this is what this is for, but this isn't strictly necessary. If let's say that your squeeze page goes straight to an offer, and then after that you don't care about any timers on any pages, well, you wouldn't even need to do these fields. All you would need is the timer. And in order to have this timer line up with what it says on the other one, and again, you can see here that I did not follow my rule of putting it way out in the future, so I will go ahead and do that now just so it matches, right? Again, doesn't really matter what the year is as long as it's way out in the future, so that way we're not getting caught by having this not work sometime in the next 14 days, which is what it was set for. So after this, we go ahead and we jump into the custom code. And again, you see it's the same kind of setup. We just have the ClickFix JavaScript here to enable it. We go ahead and open a div to put the shortcode in, and it's timer the same. And now it's parameter, like param equals timer, which is the URL parameter that we passed from page 1. And we have to go ahead and say, okay, we want it to submit the block, right? And this is optional. All this is saying is that when the timer hits 0, what do you want it to do? And we say that we want it to submit the form that's in the block that we identify here. And again, that is just a way to add a third page, or to send them to a offer expired page that connects to their contact record, so that way you can fire off different automations or lock them out of it, a bunch of different things you could do with that. And then display equals no is simply to say that when there's a 0 on the timer, don't show that digit. Okay, and that's it. Once those two things are done, we have deadline 2 here. It's ready to go. So that's the page setup. Now on the back end, you'll see, let's go ahead and just jump into the contact that I just made here. All right, so let's jump into the contact that I made here, and you can see that I just made custom fields. I put them in their own tab here called deadline funnels, and I have 2 custom fields. I have a custom field called deadline end, which is a date and time field, as you can see, and that gets populated when somebody submits the form. And then I have a deadline email timer, and this is just I believe this is a long text field, because that allows us to put HTML. And we'll just go ahead and jump in here so you can also see the setup and the field type. Deadline funnels, yeah. So date and time and long text, right? And the names, you can name them whatever you want. That of course will affect what you do with your, how you use the merge tags. So we have those 2 things set up. Now let's jump into the messages, right? So we have here, it's just a simple email. I went ahead and just used the merge fields that we get from those custom fields. Deadline end, I went ahead and chose the format that I wanted it to display in. This is a format of deadline end. You can have it display however you want. I did nice and long, so actually I believe I did it like this, right? So I have the month, the date, the year, and the time. In the context, time zone is probably best. If you have it as an offer that's going to expire at midnight Eastern or midnight Pacific or whatever, then you can also select a specific time zone. So that way it's always counting down, or at least always showing in the proper time zone. Now, in this case, because this is what we call a perpetual or an evergreen type deadline, we would actually want to put it in probably their time zone, because that's what they would be expecting to see. So let's go ahead and do the deadline end in context time zone. Let's do a short. Let's do it like that. Okay. All right. So here we are with the link. We just got to grab the link, go down here, and let's take a look at that. The link is very simple. It is the exact same link in this case as what we used from the first page to the second page, and it is basically just putting in deadline 2 because we want to resend them back. We're imagining that that was where we made the offer, so we want to resend them back there, and we just got to go ahead and include their email, so that way that gets filled out on deadline 2 page. And then the really important part is the timer equals deadline end and the Unix. So this is exactly what we did for the form settings of deadline page 1. And that's it. So when we go to our email, it is counting down. We click on here. It takes us to the page, and the timers are still linked up. Right, so this is kind of the secret here. We'll get into how you create the actual animated GIF of that timer in a second. And the last thing we have here is we have the merge field for the deadline email timer custom field, and that is something that we're going to be populating in our automation via a webhook. And that's it. It's that simple to create the message. Let's go ahead and take a look at how we did the actual timer itself to get that set up, and then we'll jump into the automation to look at how we populate that dynamically. So here we are on countdownmail.com. You can see here, countdownmail.com. This is a completely free account that we set up. And what we're going to do when you get here, you're going to be probably here on the dashboard, right? And what we want to do is we want to create a timer, and it's going to be a dynamic timer. So we click on create a timer. We call it dynamic. We give it a name. We set everything up however we want, as far as the design, colors, and some of these things are paid options. But again, we didn't need the paid option to get this to work. Once you're done setting it all up, you're going to look at this countdown code. You can decide to go ahead and align it and do whatever you want. One thing I've really done, it has done responsive. I've done for Retina, and the HTTPS is probably a good idea. So that way it doesn't get blocked by most of the different services out there. Okay. And so this is going to be the code that you're going to copy. I'm going to jump back to the timer that I already have created, so you can see that it coincides with what we did here. So we have here the dynamic timer, and this is the embed code that we have for this. And you can see that this date time is in a little bit different format, but that's no problem. Ontraport can handle setting it up in the ISO 8601. So we'll go ahead and take a look at the automation now for getting the GIF in place. So we're back here in Ontraport. We have this automation set up, and by the way, if you want this automation, just go ahead and send me a direct message on Facebook, or ask for it in our official ClickFix Facebook group or on the YouTube channel, and I'll get it over to you. It's no problem. It's nothing fancy or anything like that, but it will speed up the implementation of this for your business, because it has the different fields already created. They're connected to this. and it will also just go ahead and create these demo landing pages for you as well. And we also have a little checklist here on what needs to be done in order to get this up and running. So the important part for this is we're going to be looking at the webhook, right? So we have a trigger of submits form, any contact in account, move here when triggered. And if you wanted to lock this as more of a kind of a deadline funnel type setup, I have this open for move here when triggered because I want to be able to do tests and you know, when we're doing the testing phases, we need to be able to do this multiple times. But you could quite easily say ignore this trigger, or you could click on this. This trigger can only be activated once per contact. And that would be another layer of security for anybody who's trying to come in here with the same email address. It wouldn't actually update their timer. And so their timers, as long as they're still clicking all the links and all that, their timers would still default to 0, and they would not be able to take the offer. But again, this is one of those things where, you know, you have to kind of ask yourself, if somebody is going through all the trouble to try and circumvent my deadline funnel because they want to give me money, do I really want to stop them? Oh, probably not. You want to put some basic safeguards in, so that way people understand that when you make an offer, there is an actual timer and an actual time limit, and so they do take action. But if somebody is willing to jump through all the hoops to kind of decode how to get around a deadline funnel, and then just let them give you money. I defeat deadline funnels all the time. It's a little bit more involved than it would be with this, but again, you know, if somebody wants to give you money, let them do so. The secret sauce here is simply going ahead and using the Ontraport API, and we are doing the contact saver update. You'll go ahead and put in your API key, your API app ID and API key. Those you can get from here in our checklist. You can see that this will take you straight to your existing keys. If you click on it, and that is basically just inside of your administration, integrations, Ontraport API instructions and key manager, and that's where you can either make a new key or you can get your existing keys. You're going to put that into here and make sure that it's a post webhook method, and then we're going to go ahead and put the data that we want to send. And that data is very simple. We want to list their email. And this is all case sensitive, so make sure you put it in correctly. You want to make sure that you list their email in here, so that way it knows which contact record to put this information into. All right, so this next line is the custom field ID. So in this case, it's F2467. If you don't know what the custom field ID is for the long text field that we created to house this embed code, you can always go to any landing page, and you would be able to, let's do it on this one. You'd be able to just go in here, and we called it deadline email timer. We add that to the page. We can go ahead and publish this, visit the page, and then we can use our ClickFix extension here to find the field name, and it is F2467. Once you have the field name, you can obviously go ahead and delete that custom field, and you just drop that in here. And then we're going to do double quotes, and then we're going to input the embed code that we got from the countdownmail.com, right? So that's all of this. Now, the only thing you have to do in order to make this work is you have to, because JSON, this is the language that this is written in, because this uses double quotes to identify what information should be included, we have to use these backslashes here to what they call escape these interior quotes. And all that means is that if we put this symbol here in front of this quote here, it tells the system to ignore that quote or to use it exactly as is. right? And so you can see here that I had to do it in front of this quote here, in front of this quote here, in front of both of these, right? In front of this one and in front of this one. And that's it. Once you have that ready to go, then the next thing you'd want to do for your automation is you'd want to go ahead and decide when people get emails. In our example, we're not waiting any amount of time or anything like that. We are just going ahead and sending the email directly, but you could always add in a wait step, and you could say, okay, I want to wait for a date that's relative to a contact field, and you could say that you want it to be, relative to the deadline end. Let's say that this is a 3-day flash sale. Well, you could have it wait until 48 hours before the deadline expires. If I can do it 2 days, it doesn't like to do that many hours. So 2 days, which would be 48 hours before the deadline end, and then send the email. Or you could do it, an hour before or whatever, right? So if you're using, that's one of the advantages of using this date time field, is that you can now trigger emails that will go out relative to when that timer is going to end. And of course, this is all evergreen, so this will be on a per contact basis, so people can be going through the funnel at their own speed. But I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. I don't need to do any of that. And that's it. These are the two basics of being able to send an email with a GIF timer. You need to use a webhook to update the embed code to include the proper deadline. And that's one thing that I did forget to say. Here, when we do deadline end, right. So you can see here that it needs to be in a special ISO 8601 format. But the problem is that here we don't actually have that as an existing option, right? So all we did is we just went ahead and we just threw in whatever we wanted, right? So we said this one, for example, and we used Ontraport's built-in editor for these different types of timestamps, and you can look this up or you can Google it. But basically all you had to do is replace all of this stuff with %C in a lowercase and like that. And then this puts it into the ISO 8601 format that we need, right? So you just go ahead and put in the merge field and you replace the format, whatever format Ontraport gives you, and you just replace it with %, lowercase c, %, and you are done. All right, so once that's done, you now should have a functioning timer, a GIF timer that is dynamically updated for each and every prospect. All right, so that handles the timer. It handles all of the custom fields. Now there are two additional layers of security that we can add to these pages if we want to kind of lock it down a little bit, so that people, short of dropping cookies and all that, the only other things we can really do are we can have a separate block on the landing page, and we can go ahead and make sure that we display this block to anyone who is been identified, right? So identified means that Ontraport has gone ahead and they understand that this person is somebody that they've seen before, right? So there's a cookie or any other number of ways that if they were signed in somewhere else, if this is an identified visitor and Ontraport knows that they've done this from this device again, then it will show this block instead of the top block, right? So now I'm going to go ahead and also do the display settings here, and I'm going to say who do I want this to see. I want it to be only anonymous visitors, right? And so this is one little layer of security that we can put on here. So now theoretically, if I go to deadline 1 and I go through all of the steps, let's go ahead and just do a new person. All right, so this resets a new timer. It's going to give me a new email in a second here. If I go to deadline 1 again, let's see what happens. Oh, so Ontraport knows who I am, and so now I can't just go re-opt in and start the timer over again, right? So you can see that somebody, with some skills, they'd be able to clear their cookies, their cache, they would be able to use a different browser. There's any number of ways that can be done, but all those things can also be done with deadline funnels as well, all right? But what about on page 2, so the offer page, right? So if we go to the offer page, you remember that we had it set up where it is pulling in the email, and we also have a timer parameter here that tells us exactly when the timer should expire, in this case 22 hours, 20 minutes, and 40 some odd seconds. But what if somebody figures out that, okay, it is the timer in the URL that is controlling all of this? What happens when we get rid of all of the URL parameters? Well, what happens is that the timer defaults to whatever we set it to inside of the Ontraport editor. And that was way out in the future. And so theoretically, somebody would be able to defeat your deadline funnel by just removing the timer parameter in the URL. So how do we get around that? How do we solve that? Well, let's jump into the editor. And this is just a matter of adding in a couple of extra little things. So I went ahead and I put in the deadline end field, right? So again, in a real scenario, all of this would be hidden. But I went ahead and put in the deadline end field, and you'll see why in a second. And then the next thing I want to do is I want to, the default behavior for this form, because again, this form will be submitted automatically, but we're not going to have the email here, so the form isn't going to be able to submit without the email. But what we want to do is we want to have a fallback, and we're going to go ahead and grab this URL here as well. And we're going to click on the timer. We're going to say, okay, when the timer expires, we're going to send it to that same URL. All right. Now we need to add in a couple lines of additional code here so that the timer can look for the URL parameter of timer. And if not, it's going to go ahead and set it to 0. Rather than having you watch me type it out, I'm just going to copy and paste the one I have set up here, and I'm going to explain it. So what we're saying here is we want to fill field 2466, which is the deadline end field. We want to fill that field with the URL timer, so the parameter timer from the URL. So that is assuming somebody has come from a link and they have the timer in the URL. Then it's going to grab the value of that and it's going to put that into the field. And if there is no timer parameter, then it's going to fill that field with 0. Okay. Now we're going to create a variable. All right. So this is how we do a variable, and we're going to say, okay, time check. The variable time check is this field 2466, and if the variable time check is equal to 0, right, then we're going to go ahead and force the timer to only have 1 second left, so it's going to expire, right? And then that's it. These two are just closing out these little fields here, or these shortcodes here. All right, this show after 1 second. Right now we're working on a little bug fix with this, but this is just a workaround. So it's going to go ahead and after 1 second, it's going to set the timer to 1 second. And it's going to go ahead and then expire the timer. And when the timer expires, we're going to see that it gets redirected to this URL here, right? And again, the reason why we can't just rely on the redirect that we would normally do from the shortcodes is because will be no email field, right? And since email is a required field, this form won't submit, but the timer will still expire and we should be all good. So let's go ahead and test that out. All right, let that published. All right, so again, Let's say that somebody is thinks that they're super smart and they go ahead and say, oh, well, if I just get rid of the timer parameter, then I won't have a deadline anymore and I can continue to look at the page. Well, if they come without a timer parameter at all, boom, sets it to 0 and it redirects them to the expired offer. All right. So that's it. It was a little bit longer than normal for us to go through, but basically what we've done is we've come up with a way for you to set up a deadline funnel for absolutely free using ClickFix shortcodes that have 2 additional layers of protection where somebody will not be able to, at least not easily, go ahead and re-opt in because they'll be identified, and so Ontraport will show them this block here that is the expired block. And we've also set it up so that if they do have the URL for page 2 or for the offer page in your case, but they don't use a timer in the URL, it also expires everything and they're unable to take that offer, and they will learn that when you set a deadline, you really mean it. Hope that was interesting. Hope that helps somebody out. If you have any questions or comments, as always, please drop them below this video or in the official Ontraport Facebook group or in our official ClickFix Facebook group, and we'll be happy to get you sorted. You can also visit clickfix.io at any time and click on any of the buttons that say speak with an expert or consult an expert. And we'll be happy to schedule a call to talk about exactly how we can help you get the most out of your Ontraport account.